Thank you for those presentations. I mean, there's obviously a lot of cross threads throughout here. Clearly, issues of scale, issues of translation, issues of documentation, sources, the relationship between the body, intimacy, and technology, of course. Um, and then also sort of how maybe let's say the double-edged sword of abstraction, veils of clouds, where in one way there's a way to sort of obscure um, responsibility for certain actors, or like in the case of ecological catastrophe, or who's actually producing that, which is, you can often pinpoint that to a concrete entity. And then the other version of that of sort of how do clouds enable certain groups, persons, selves to evade sort of all-knowing surveillance apparatus. And so sort of how clouds are used becomes a sort of a justice issue in various ways. So I wanted to ask first, where, I mean, maybe to step back a second, where do you see the political in your art in particular? Is it the thing itself? Is it the means of its production, the kind of collaboration that goes into it, the research? Maybe if each of you could address that a bit.
Okay, I'll start. To me, the political, I think that was an important question I asked at the very beginning, especially when dealing with the problem of human disappearance or forced disappearances, because I always thought that art was not political. I thought that I separated the political from, well, the political belonged to the political, to the government, to the institutions. And I think to me, it was important to realize that it's not that way. And I have been able to explore myself of how my own life, even if I don't want to, and even if I don't want to be part of it, is political. And then my relation, if I understood that then if my life was political and what I was doing was creating art or being an artist, whatever, if I was a dentist, if I was a chef, whatever it is, I understood that then that was political as well, because I had to take decisions. I have to talk to people. I had to, pay the bills and so on and so forth. So all of that translates into the political realm. So to me, then, how do in a way separating, let's say, just do a project like such as like the state of disappearance for me was a bit more explicit, if you want. So I had to deal with an issue specifically. And then the problem is, that I had to confront was how would I pass something that is specific, like, for example, people searching for the disappeared, they need a picture, or like Julieta was, yes, right? Was talking about feminicides in Mexico. The same. So people, put a picture there and go to the streets and say, my daughter's been killed, or my daughter's been disappeared, and so on and so forth. So people look for specific things, and those are different types of political acts. That's like activism, or people just simply, fathers, mothers, siblings go into the streets to search for somebody. That is seen as a very specific, politically, an act, political act. Now, to me, art, at least, and in painting, as I do it, so it's difficult to translate something so complex, especially in the abstract. And what I mean by the abstract existing, it means that whatever, something else is happening, a part of the physicality of our bodies, something else is happening in our minds, and in the things we sense. And I think those are the difficult things to translate, and especially when it comes to translate something as forced disappearance, as, to translate that in the painting, in the work. That's the difficulty of the art, and how to do it through the poetic, and how to do it through the poetic. And the poetic doesn't mean a beauty only, is all the pain that we suffer, all the sadness that we suffer, all the maybe all those conflicts that we have as humans, and how do we translate that into the image that we are creating, or to the spaces in the case of your presentations. How do you manage to be able to present, or when in the case of yourselves, I think that's the difference. Maybe what I have find with your work, you have to deal with something different. I just create an image, but you actually have to create spaces where we are going to inhabit. I think that's also very, very interesting, I think, to observe your work, and how do you translate that violence, those violent spaces people live, inhabit, and to try to create something different, like what Adrian was saying, the change. So how do you change that? And I think, to me, through art, is to understand that as much as we want to create lovely places or lovely walls and whatever, if our heads are a mess, then it is going to be difficult. So I guess I focus more on that part. I focus more on that, through painting, than obviously what you do. You have to focus on the space as well as the internal. So anyway, yeah, that's my approach.
I mean, I think the personal is political. I don't just think that, but a lot of other feminist artists before me that I've studied also think that. And I am very thankful to have had like that opportunity to study them in relationship to the work that I do. So the personal is political. Art is a form of resistance. It's the space where I choose to resist from. I believe that an image can be way more powerful than maybe its original symbol. So that's kind of where I stand.
Yeah, for me, I'm invested, in the idea that the political is a question of the systems and structures that we're embedded within. Whether or not we're conscious of that, and those systems and structures, span a cultural domain and a biological domain, and they span timescales. There are histories to systems. So I think, to the extent that we actually experience things in terms of moment to moment in everyday life, how do we expose those systems in such a way that they can be apprehended intuitively or aesthetically, and dealt with in the moment. And that's, I think, a particular point of intervention, that all these works operate within on some level, creating some small rupture or estrangement from everyday habits, so that we see the implications of those habits and how they relate on a larger scale.
Maybe if we could talk about this idea of scale, body, and habitation a bit, because obviously this is operating in different ways across all of your work. There's the size of a painting, the literal size of a painting, and sort of how that relates to the body. There's the sort of the fact that a lot of the work that's being scanned by drones, for example, is of sculptures that are also referencing the body, have some sort of relationship to the human. And then, of course, with Brian, with your work, the sort of ambient media sound as a thing that creates a kind of space of inhabitation. So I'm wondering, like, how do you all perceive sort of how is your work to be experienced in a way, let's say? Is it a singular experience, a singular subject sort of wandering into a gallery? Is it a collective experience? Is it something that you sort of sit with? How, and then I would say, just sort of add to that maybe, how is the work, sort of the violence that's being translated into the art, meant to be sort of experienced, as you mentioned, like intuitively perhaps, or turning data into sound that isn't like maybe immediately recognizable, but because of the sort of the triangulation of sort of an artist statement, the position of something on the gallery wall, the objects themselves, the sounds that create a sort of atmosphere there. It's all a kind of production toward a certain kind of experience. So like everyone's sort of creating a kind of space here. And so I'm wondering how are your works to be experienced?
That's a great question. I think I'll just say, you know, in terms of my work and with sound, it is a hypothesis. You know, I don't want to make great claims about what happens or doesn't happen with sound, but it is kind of like a what if, you know, like what if there's a different entry point into these subjects, you know, what can emerge. And I think, yeah, the ideal situation in which to experience these works, I see, you know, I see as a group of people in the room sitting with this work for, you know, for a durational period of time. But of course, you know, we see it through documentation and presentations, and it's not always that, you know, ideal space. I think you know, I maybe struggle with that, you know, on some level, but there's always like an intertwining of ideas and intention and physical media, and you know, so I think being invested in those inner relationships and those what ifs and those, you know, what if you could
Yeah.
what if you could feel this topic as opposed to see it, you know, I think that's kind of part of it.
For me, I think context is really important, and you know, the context where the work is shown is part of the work, and so I really try to think about it when I'm showing my work. And what's great about working with 3D and simulation is that you can really adapt an artwork to all these different contexts. For example, like the protest, it has been really great for me to kind of think of ways to translate that image into, you know, something that can be disseminated and given away during protests and get kind of put back in public space. That has been something that I think probably been like the most exciting experience for me as an artist, showing my work actually. So yeah, that and this idea of like 3D and simulation allowing you to kind of show objects removed from their original context too is interesting to me because it allows you to play with scale and also to kind of step outside and look at these objects from a different perspective that makes a lot of things more evident than kind of looking at them at this one-to-one scale in the street. So I think it's those 2 points for me.
If you'd like to, I can also ask another.
Yeah, to me, the precisely that's part of the idea with the abstract, that how do you make people, like you say, well, can you make somebody feel something? Well, no, because it's up to them whether that's going to happen really. So it doesn't matter whether you show, you know, the piece and expecting people to feel or to do or to react or to, you know, change them with an image. I think to me is so much you can do. I think that what you can do is just do the image the best you can do, the thing you are creating the best you can do it, and do it with a purpose, not just for example, to me, art in that sense, I do it because that's what I do. That's what I can. I don't see life. Life and art is the same thing. So then I don't. I think that if you start from the idea that what you're producing is something that you're doing because you believe in it, then, you know, that is surely and hopefully will have something to deliver to the people that you are, you know, respectfully doing it for them to see it. And if they grab something, they grab something. If they don't, they don't.
One thing which, you know, I actually wanted to bring up during the student presentations, and I think is really important here as well, is just sort of the relationship between, let's say, history and memory, especially when we're dealing with um, people who are being disappeared, or environmental situations that are being created that are not, readily apparent, that are very much the product of structural histories of violence, the machinations of governments, the machinations of corporations. There are real things at play in history that may or may not be present on the surface, but often you recognize them through these memories of things that are absent in the landscape or absent from your family in many cases. So how do you see that interacting? It's kind of, that's another way into the sort of intimacy versus maybe abstract level, but this issue of disappearance and its relationship to memory, and then these larger structural forces, which you may not be able to actually experience except through memory, as opposed to a direct encounter with history.
To me, for example, that in terms of, because I met many people during this first disappearance project, first disappearance, and I think there was, and still with this new project that my husband and I are working on the technology project, I think I realized as well that maybe because of technology, maybe not, I'm not sure, but I'm still thinking through it to think that most people feel like they have to do something, like they are affected constantly by everything, and that like as if they have the duty to do it. And I think, for example, with forced disappearances, I lived since I was a child. I remember I seeing pictures, seeing announcements on TVs and so on about the disappearance. So it's not something that it was new. I started to do this project in 2017. So it existed before that. It existed before I born. And it does seems like when it affects you, a political problem specifically, then it hits you. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And then there's somebody else, to other community, to other people as well, to try to deal with that. I think sometimes we try to deal with everything and we end up doing nothing. So I think if we just, I realized that that to focus on something is always important. But if you do it because you care, not because it's in a fashion, not because it's a trend on Facebook or whatever. So because you actually believe and it's affecting your life, because I think if you feel it deep inside, you will try to change something because it's affecting your life, your loved ones, the people that surround you, your community, your specific community. But if not, you will just try to do something, maybe a post or whatever, and then the next day you'll forget about it. So I think to me, that was specifically one of the things I've been trying to understand myself as well. How do you focus your attention and focus? Because you could find groups of people, for example, her that I suppose she's very into the feminicides and so on. So I bet she has met loads of people, and I just to focus on a specific problem. I think it helps a lot as well to the way we do things and change things.
Yeah, I think there's many forms of violence, right? And we've kind of been talking about this throughout the day. And I think one very big form of violence is erasing history, erasing characters in history, erasing names of victims, or not even wanting to name them. That's a very big act of violence. And so, the way that I've thought of as a way to resist this is to actually show what's trying to be erased, name the problem, name the victims. They exist, or they did exist. So I think it's all about kind of, like naming and evidencing, like visually, graphically, things that are happening that are trying to be constantly erased.
I think for me, think about memory as a process of reperformance. That memory is not static, it's continually unfolding, it's being recreated and rearticulated. And I suppose on some level, in the way I'm trying to deal with that in my work is to treat that as a process that can be made audible. And so, we hear in the moment some of what is being reperformed that has aspects, from the past and what's coming out of that. But I think also, reperformance. I mean, what I really love about Julieta's project, is opening up the possibilities for how that reperformance can happen. So taking a statue that has certain affordances, a monument, that is restrictive in the way that it can be dealt with, and then exploding that out into, okay, with digital media, it can take on different forms and become more flexible in that way. So, I think there's multiple ways of thinking through memory as reperformance and shifting the terms uh, of that rearticulation, that maybe all these projects get to in some way or another.
Sick. All right, so I want to acknowledge that we're cutting into lunchtime pretty heavily, and people don't seem to be grabbing as much food as they should. So maybe we'll wrap it here, and then if you have questions you'd like to chat with the artists about, please catch them during the breaks. Thank you all, and thank you all.
Thank you.